Shoes. Recorded live.
Happy Tax Day, everybody. This is the April 16th, 2016 edition of the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the blacksci-fi.com website. And my name is William Hayashi. I'm your host, but our special guest tonight is Clarence Young. And he's been described to me. It was sent to me that he's a writer, a wanderer, and a novelist. I'm just hoping there's no Alzheimer's involved, where you can't find where your house is, which forces you to wander. But I do want to welcome you to the show, Clarence. And before we get started, right into it, where are you coming to us from?
Yep, coming to you straight from Detroit, Michigan.
Man, we could tell stories about Detroit, couldn't we?
Oh man, Detroit is one big story right now. One of the biggest and best. And
yeah, well, I don't know if it's the best. I think you could probably do with a different governor, but that's just my humble opinion.
Oh yeah, yours and about 10 million other people. So you got a friend in that one.
Yeah, how do these people get elected?
You know, it's Flim Flam and Von Dugel.
Okay.
I mean, this guy particularly came in, the usual, I'm going to run it like a business, and as soon as you say the word business, everybody's eyes just sparkle like you're the Messiah. When, we can see how well businesses usually treat people.
Well, not only that, but do you mind, like, if I take just a second to give a very, very good analogy about business? Here's the thing. What people don't realize, the average person doesn't realize, because we had the same thing happen here in Illinois, it's just that we have a very, very strong Democratic legislature. But here's the mistake that people make. People think that if you're good in business, you must be good at governance. And the thing is that there's no overlap in skill set between running a state and running a company. First of all, if you are the governor, then and you adopt all of these draconian policies of hurting your people, what you're doing is, if you're going to take that analogy, you're hurting your own investors, because the people who you're supposed to be ministering for and helping out are the residents of the state. And if you come in and you start taking things away from the people of the state and making them drink, some of that bad water and things like that, I mean, come on, think about how many thousands of kids are going to have, intellect problems because their brains were poisoned with lead. So anyway, that's my high horse for the up top on the on the politics thing. But let's get back to you. I am curious. Did you grow up in Detroit and you've seen what's been going on, or did you come to live there later?
Nope, born and raised.
Okay,
Always
so you've seen a lot of things happen in Detroit. Just looking at your picture, I'm thinking you caught the last part of the whole Motown experience there.
Yep, caught that. Caught the tail end of the riots.
Oh yeah. And as far as schooling was concerned, did you go to, Detroit public schools, or what was your educational experience?
Yep, Detroit public schools all the way through.
Okay, and no, I mean, you're a novelist and a writer, short stories, what have you. Was this kind of a talent that came at you early in life?
Not so much the writing. I was always somebody that liked to cobble things together as a kid. I would be the kid who, walking down the street, I see a G.I. Joe head and a body of a Spider-Man, somebody just threw it in the garbage. I'd pick them up and put them together and make a new toy. So
okay.
I took that sense of, let's see what I can do with this stuff. And later on, it kind of transferred to writing. I always loved to read, but I didn't start writing until, maybe 11, 12, somewhere in there. That's when my mother told me I read so much that I should just write my own book. And I thought, the light went off. This sounds perfect. Let's do this.
Right. And so, I mean, even as a young kid, you were a tinkerer. I guess would that be fair? I mean,
Yes, definitely. I was always the one who was mixing and matching, and nothing. I couldn't get a toy and it just be that toy. I always had to change it in some kind of way to make it more fun to me.
Right.
And I try to do that with same thing with my writing now. I don't just want to write a story. I want to make it, number one, fun, not just to me but to the readers as well, and be somewhat challenging. So I like to bring that sense of tinkering with things to my fiction.
But okay, so you go from being a tinkerer, and then you start out doing the, kind of the writing thing. Did writing come early, like high school, elementary school? Where did that all blossom for you?
Elementary. I did my first short story, because I was always a kid that I loved to read and I liked to write. I just never considered writing as something that actual real people did. To me, a book was something that you went to the store, you bought it, you read it. But I never gave any thought to like the work that went into it.
Right.
But the teachers would assign us like write a short story, and I would be the kid like, yeah, let's do this. And I never stopped to think about why are you so excited to do this. And my first story was about aliens coming to Earth, using people as hunting dogs to hunt other people. And my teachers, they loved it. They were like, this is interesting. And this was around maybe 4th or 5th grade. Mm-hmm. And after that, I would noodle around with little stories on my own, but that was just the past time. It wasn't until actually college that I decided I think I enjoy this writing thing. I want to start focusing more on that and less on career that I went to college for, which was computer programming.
Right. This is weird because so many, at least the guys I've interviewed who are sci-fi, fantasy, and horror creatives, so many of us either started out or are still in the IT industry.
You know what? It's all Spock's fault.
Whose fault?
It's entirely Spock. It's entirely Spock.
Oh, Spock. Okay.
Yeah.
So you think that was the influence for all of us?
Probably. I know. That was the influence for me. I couldn't even pretend otherwise. It was Spock was cool. Spock did computers. I wanted to do computers. And I enjoyed the computers. There was another instance where I could tinker with things, but after a while, it kind of faded for me, and I started moving more toward the creative side of things.
Mm-hmm. And when I think back, I was just thinking back to when I got into computers, and that was like 1970, which of course was after Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And Spock was a hero of mine. Greg Moore, was it? No, it was Greg. Who was the brother in Mission Impossible?
Greg Morris. Yep, Mission Impossible.
Yeah, Greg Morris. Yeah, Greg Morris. He was a techie, and that attracted me. He was like the first MacGyver.
Yes.
He could put together stuff. He was the technician. He could make things happen, and maybe that helped me too. Well, that and the fact that I was able to put my information in a certain school system's payroll program and get free checks before I was caught. That also was very attractive too.
That would definitely be attractive right there.
Yeah. So anyway, what were okay, Star Trek was an influence of yours. Were you like a big TV and movie person? Were you a comic book person? What kind of stimulation did you have that early on at that time when you were starting to get your writing groove on?
It was all of them. TV, not so much movies. I didn't really get to go to a lot of movies coming up, but TV was, in Detroit we had Sir Graves. I've got Dr. Strange on my mind because of all the controversy right now, but we had Sir Graves on, and he would show Godzilla movies every weekend. So that was like in front of the TV, don't bother me, Sir Graves is on.
Okay.
And
all right, so
comic books.
The TV was the big thing. What about some of those sci-fi shows? You had what do you have? You had Johnny Quest. You had the big puppet head shows. Stingray, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You had some of the first anime that actually came to America.
Like Herculoid.
Or Astro Boy, or some of those things. Were you like grooving on all of those things during that time?
some of them, like the Herculoids was one of my favorites. But in Detroit, we didn't get a lot of that on TV. I saw like I got into Doctor Who only because they came to PBS, public broadcasting station, to show it.
Right. Yeah. Same here in Chicago.
So I got into that one. But I didn't do a lot of TV at all when I was a kid. I was one of those weird kids where it's just like, if the TV was on, I would look at it, but I wasn't one of those who would go and actively seek it out, except for on Saturdays with my Godzilla movies. Those were not touchable. I was mostly comics growing up, and of course, I was a Marvel guy, not DC.
Okay, I don't know if you've pissed off half of our listeners or not, but I get you.
Well, not that I didn't like DC. I mean, I had my DC favorites. I did Batman. I did Superman. My Flash was the favorite. But Marvel stories always had a little extra something to me that DC didn't.
Sure.
So I kind of gravitated toward them. And was huge into the Pope books.
Oh, really?
Yep. Like there was a comic shop not too far from the school where at my middle high school, and so Fridays I would go there as a treat to myself for getting through the week without killing anybody, basically, and would buy Doc's. I keep wanting to say Doctor Strange. Obviously I've got that movie on my mind. Doc Samson. I'll get those books.
Yeah.
Or the John Carter books. I would kind of get one of those every week and just go through that. And those they weren't really big influences on me because I enjoyed them, but they were just popcorn.
Okay, it was just kind of like something to do.
But it was enjoyable to do it. It was a nice little escape.
And so, I mean, if you were going to characterize the genres where you write right now, what would they be? Would it be, would you call it flat out sci-fi? Would you call it fantasy? How do you characterize where you like to live, where you're most comfortable writing?
I think I would go with the catch-all speculative fiction because it's what I do a little bit of everything. The science fiction I do doesn't really focus that much on science. So, purists would say this is not really science fiction. So it's more spec fiction. I like to take an idea and take it along this logical progression and see what happens at the end. Okay.
And then like when you're, let's say high school, did you do any creative writing in high school at that point, that kind of carried on what you had started when you were younger?
Creative in a way, because, in high school it was more about, having to write the book reports or whatnot in one day, which is what I was famous for doing that, the last minute. Oh, I got to, it's 9 o'clock at night. I got a report due in the morning. I better write something. So I got really creative at writing out these. And I always had good grades on them, which always surprised the hell out of me. But I would write these wild reports on books, which most of the time I actually hadn't even read. And I would slide it to the teacher thinking, okay, they're going to kill me. And they would like, oh, this is great. This is a nice insight here and there. And so after a while, I started to think, what is going on with these papers that these teachers are seeing this? When to me, it's the utter BS. I'm just like trying to, a Hail Mary pass, and they liked it. So I started to analyze actually what I was doing, and then even though I didn't read a lot of the books that they assigned, I knew them enough where I could give some substantive comments. Right. And when I actually studied, and this was like, this wasn't all through high school. This was only the 9th grade, when nobody does anything in 9th grade because you're too busy being just like, wow, I'm a grown up now. Right. But once I got out of, yep. Once I got past that stage, then I started to buckle down, and I realized that you could be creative with the more, staid writing assignments and still, fulfill the requirements of them. Because most people would just write, this is the book I read. This is what happened in the book, blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't doing that. And I think that's what my teachers were responding to. They're like, I kind of had fun with it, even though it was always last minute and always thought I was going to fail.
Well, it's obvious. First of all, if you're a good writer, people don't necessarily look for, nitpicky kind of facts. They want to see, well, how does, what's Clarence writing about this book? And then they go, well, that's, like you said, well, that's insight, or that it's not the normal. And then they talked about when they went to Greece and blah, 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 a mere factual retelling of the book. I mean, my hat is off to you. You were one better than me. I just invented books, and to give the book report some authenticity, I made up a Library of Congress number, which that to me was like the icing on the cake. Who's going to think that someone's going to go and fake a Library of Congress number? And then I just made up books. But you actually had the real books. And you were doing even better than what I did, because what I did, I could have written anything. So when you realized that you could spin a story even about stuff that other people knew about, that people found compelling enough to give you good grades, was there a reflection of that ability in your own personal creative writing, or had you gotten to that point yet? Telling your own story.
I hadn't gotten to that point yet. I didn't start with actually seriously thinking about maybe I should make my own stories until my first year of college. High school was still just, hey, let's have fun with words. And there was one teacher, an English teacher, who was my nemesis, but she, looking back on it, she taught me a lot. We were studying native son. And this was the first time I realized how books were actually constructed. And I never thought about that before, but, she pointed out that this opening scene of Native Son, and then you progress to the ending scene, how they parallel each other. And that kind of blew my mind. I was thinking, wow, to be an author, to sit down and plot out from page one and all that stuff in between to the end, that is some, to me, it was like, this is the ultimate Lincoln log building, and that's what kind of appealed to me the most, that sense of I can build something with this, because that's how, like I said, I grew up always wanting to build things and teach with things. So when I realized that books are actually constructed, that opened up the creative door so that me start doing my own stories.
Sure. And so you at that age, even you were thinking about speculative fiction more so than any other genre?
Oh, yeah, it was always that. Even though I would get into the books Dune, Harlan Ellison, that kind of thing. Stuff that I would read it and not really understand it. This is like, for 13, 14 years old, you get a basic understanding of it. But I knew there was something happening with this material that I wasn't getting from anything else.
Well, the cool thing about when I read Dune, and sorry to correct you, but it's Frank Herbert who wrote that. But when I read
I mentioned
Dune,
Ellison as another example.
Oh, another example. Okay, yeah. For me with Dune, there was two things. First, in that first book, it was so dense with cool stuff. It had politics, it had intrigue, it had betrayal, it had so many cool things that I thought it was just a dense, great story. And I think I read it in maybe I was 15 or so when I read Dune. And then when I found out that Herbert was writing more books, I got those because it's something that I have done is he created some compelling characters with some really interesting situations that they were thrust into. And once I was invested in the characters, then I was hooked. I was hooked because I wanted to see what happened next. Was any of that construct something that struck you? Obviously you learned about the beginning, the middle, and the end, because if you got this opening scene and you have this closing scene that kind of completes a storied circle, it's a cool thing. Were you looking at the construction of stories at that point, almost, as a honing of your craft?
Just starting to at that point.
Uh-huh.
Like with Dune, I think I read it about the same age you were, and I knew that what really appealed to me about Dune was the humanity of it. Like, even though they had these giant sandworms and this fantastic tech, it was about the people. It wasn't about the tech.
Right.
And that's what really appealed to me the most about it. I mean, that's one reason I like Star Trek so much. It was never so much about the tech. It was about the people.
Well,
And
Star Trek was written as kind of like, first of all, it was sold as Wagon Train to the Stars, but it was usually a morality play about some issue that we're confronting in our real lives, and they kind of Roddenberry put his own spin on it, but he did it in a way that nobody could really object to, because what he had done was thrust it several centuries into our future with people who were not Russians or not Cubans. They were completely alien, but yet the subtext was still the same.
Exactly. And I think that you get the same thing in works like Dune or Stranger in a Strange Land.
Well, even Asimov's Foundation series and even the Robot series, you're dealing with, how people deal with people, thinly disguised with robots, or even psychohistory in Asimov's Foundation series. Well, how do you manipulate a whole population of people? Kind of like Republicans. How do you make all the stupid people in America bend to our will, even though we're not helping you? But that's another.
That kind of goes. That goes back to what we were saying about Snyder and running a country or a state as a business. It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome in a way, where people know they know that this guy is really not doing anything for my interests. It's like the pharmaceutical guys who come out and say, we're not in the business of helping people. We're in the business of making sure our shareholders get maximum profit.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's one of the reasons why I love the Foundation book so much about the psychohistory. It is ridiculously easy to get a huge group of people to follow along with a set plan that you have. I mean, we've seen that's human history.
Well, I keep thinking of Heinlein's character. What's his name? I think it was Nehemiah Scudder, who was like an evangelist who led an uprising that turned the United States of America into this theocracy. And so people say, oh, that's science fiction, but and that could never happen. But then when you look at the underpinnings and you can draw the parallels to what's happening today, it's not so hard to believe that something like that could happen. And so as you're looking at these bigger issues, how is that suggested in your writing? Or did you deliberately in your early writings set out to kind of use the same kinds of constructs in order to tell some broader stories?
In a way. I did it, but the stories I told were always small and intimate stories. I mean, it was like telling the story of galactic conquest, but I'm focusing on two people. What are the daily life of two people who are living? I mean, think about it. If you think about Star Wars, all the things that happen in Star Wars, what's life like for your average, bantha herder? So I would do something like that.
Or water distiller or whatever, whatever Uncle Owen was. Yeah.
Yeah, or what's the deal with the droids? Are droids considered slave population? I mean, that was one thing that struck me about Star Wars is like it would present all this, and if you actually stopped and thought about what was happening, you'd have questions. Yeah.
And I didn't actually think about that consciously. I probably did, maybe subconsciously, but that's a pretty good. That's an issue. That's kind of issue oriented, but it's not something that was ever really addressed. How free was C-3PO? You know what I mean? As a droid. Yeah. And so those did you also embed those kinds of issues, that kind of thread in some of the stories that you started producing?
Oh, definitely. That was a definite. Because I always wanted, in any story I did, when you get to the end, I wanted there to be a question in the reader's mind. I mean, even at a young age, that was how I always operated. Which sometimes it would be a clear one, and sometimes you have to stop and think a little while. But in my mind, it was always structure this so that by the end, the question appears. And I don't give you the answer, but I mean, that's one of the things I liked about, Star Trek and Twilight Zone and other things. They would present these scenarios and leave it for you to come up with, not only the question, but the answer for yourself.
Right. All right, so tell me a little bit about the early writing. Were you doing the short stories, or did you jump out and maybe think about doing a book? And how far along was this? Was this outside of when you were out of college?
No, this is during college, so I would say late teens, early 20s. I actually started out doing poetry. Okay. Which was, I at the time I didn't consider myself a poet, but you're in college, so you're reading Carlos Castaneda, you're doing all these, this alternative stuff. So poetry seemed a natural thing. It was all terrible. It was all terrible. But
okay, is that educationally? I mean, did your instructors tell you it was terrible, or did you just not?
No, that was just me being honest with myself.
Okay, all right.
I still don't consider myself a poet. I have poetic leanings, and I think that comes through in my fiction. But at the time, I just like you're not a poet, and I would tell people this is not But one day I submitted something to a poetry contest and actually won, and got money for it. Yeah. So at that point, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, this might be something to this. So I started doing more poetry, but I knew that I wanted to do long form, and I couldn't do long form poetry. So short stories started to be, grow. Okay. And toward the end of college, that's when I completely decided I just want to do short stories. I mean, I had this one creative writing instructor who blew my mind how good he was, and he really opened me up to the short story form. As before you even think about doing a novel, focus on short stories. Hone your craft. So I did that for a few years and sold some stories here and there. And at the same time, I was starting to get the idea for a book that I wanted to do, which I finally did, but not then. It took a long, long time for me to finally get to that. But at the time, I wrote this one terrible, terrible novel, which everybody does when they first start out. It's you write it, and you hope no one ever asks you about it because it's that bad.
Yeah, I went and published mine, so I got nothing to say.
Oh, yeah, you gotta.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, according to the people who read it, it wasn't that bad. But I was having a conversation with someone today, and we were talking about, because I've had to go and do panels and even lectures about my writing craft, and I, excuse me for saying it this way, I hope I don't offend anybody, but I think the title of my next lecture is "Where Did I Get the Balls to Believe that I could write a book right out of the box?" And I think that that's a good exploration for me. I mean, you did it. I mean, you actually honed your craft. I just decided, I'm going to write a book. And I have no idea what pushed me in that direction. I mean, I never wrote short stories. I didn't do any poetry. I never wrote any songs. Everything that I wrote from about, I would say, high school on, was not creative. It was technical writing. It was research and things like that. And then all of a sudden in 2001, I sat down and started writing. And like you said, I didn't even know if it was any good. I didn't know if it was any good. And fortunately, I had somebody take all the bad parts out. So I got lucky. Like, how many short stories did you do as you were honing your craft? Because, here you are that young, that early in starting out, and you're telling us that you already sold stories at that point. I think that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I was at that point, I had the fire in me. I was writing like a story a week almost.
Wow.
And part of it was for the course, and then other stuff, the stuff that I really didn't, for me kind of thing, because I was a twofold writer. I would write for the course, but then if I had an idea that really sung to me, that was mine. I would write that, and that was not to be seen by.
You kind of saved that for yourself.
Yeah.
And so how many ideas did you kind of accumulate along the way while you were still in school?
Oh, I had a backlog of at least 30 ideas for stories by the time I got out of there.
Oh my God!
I actually still have it. It was a type that I didn't know, no computers then, so I was typing in the paper. I still got it somewhere where I would get a title, type up, okay, this is what it's about, and then just row after row after row of that. So I got about 2 or 3 pages of titles and story ideas. And my intention was to, write the stories, of course, but it never happened, And at the time, it kind of bummed me out.
Yeah, but you don't have to say it never happened. Let's just say it didn't happen so far. I mean, do you ever go back and kind of look at your ideas and see if they're something that you could expand into something fruitful today?
Yeah, not a lot. Not a lot. I mean,
really?
There's one that I did, and I guess we can talk about that later. My latest book came it was an idea that I had in college, and I let that percolate for decades before I actually wrote it. But the short stories, those were things more so that came about as a real result of a mood that I was in. So I'm going to write a story about a man who is trapped in time, blah blah blah. And I write that down as an idea. And at the time, I could see the story in my head. I could feel the direction for it. Now, if I look at it, I just don't feel it anymore.
Yeah. Okay. And so
it used to bum me out.
Did it really? That you would have ideas that didn't pan out, or
when I was younger,
what was the bumming out part?
That thing, how when you're young and you get an idea and you think that it's made out of gold and platinum. And so every idea has to flower. I mean, that's a youthful way to be. And when I was young, that was how I was. But as now I can look back on that and I'm like, guys, man, what were you thinking? That's terrible. And I immediately cross it off, throw it away. I don't have any problem because I realized if I had an idea once, I'll have an idea again. There's no lack of ideas out there.
Right.
So I don't usually pine for the old stuff that the ideas that I had, because I know I can come up with an even better idea.
Well, let me ask you this: when you come up with your ideas, where do you think that you draw those from? Is it just strictly from your imagination, or do you see things around you that will suggest maybe a plot or a storyline?
It's always something that I see around me, or just a certain feeling. I'm very big on feelings when it comes to writing and any kind of art. So, like for example, with the thing that happened in Flint with the water, I will think about some child, like you were saying, who had to grow up with this over his head, never knowing what was the cause. I mean, they don't know the machinations behind that, but they've got to deal with the effects. So that the feeling that would give me would bring a story out in me, which I haven't written one along those lines, but I probably should. And generally where my ideas come from is just a feeling that, when something happened in the world, and it's not just let me show you what happened, but this is what it does to people.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk specifically. You said your first book that you ever wrote was something that it sounded like
it was terrible.
And will it ever see the light of day?
Never. I actually still have it.
Okay.
And I have it in a drawer somewhere. I mean, the pages are probably so old and yellow by now that it's probably not even legible anymore. But it was terrible. I mean, I think about it now, and of course, when you're young, that it's going to be terrible. So it's kind of a nice joke for me now, but it will never ever see the light of day.
Okay, so what did you learn about yourself, your talent, and the art of writing by doing that first book? And then what was it that tipped you off to the fact that it wasn't something you wanted to see the light of day?
It taught me brevity. So the book was 600 pages long, number one, which I guess it was typed double spaced, so it's probably 400 pages.
Okay.
But it was so chock full of filler that I'm just ashamed of it. And at the time, if you think about it, so many books of that time, not even just the mid 80s, but just books, period. So much of them were filler because that was the form. You have to describe the uniform. Everything has to have description. And I did that in that book. And, over the years afterward, after I wrote it, and I would go back and try to read it, I would hack away so much of it that it's like, why did I even think I needed to put this in there? And that taught me. When I'm reading a book, I don't like filler. I don't like a lot of description. Because I've read enough books, I know that if a ship is huge and sleek, and that's all I need. I don't need you to tell me about every nodule that's on the ship.
Sure.
If I see
sure.
a dragon, you have a dragon in your story. I can picture a dragon. I don't need you to tell me about the color of its scales and the pattern. And that's what I was doing in my writing, and I said, no more of that. You cannot do that. You have got to get rid of all that. So it taught me to get more so to the meat of the story and less of, dressing it up.
Right. And how does the the concept that writers are told, show don't tell, instead of telling you about this person's attitude, their personality, stuff like that, you show them acting and talking to other people and interacting with other people to get that insight, is that kind of where you were at? And I'm wondering if your book is not really so bad, but maybe could use just a good edit. No, you know what? I take that back. I'm going to take your word for it because you've lived with it. Okay, so that's your first one. Well, that's your first one, and we you told us how you felt about it, but then so you had to go to the next book. Were the lessons that you learned and even taught yourself in doing the first book something that real, or were those revelations, I guess, did they help you in the writing of the next time you attempted to do, a novel-length story?
Oh, immensely. If I hadn't learned from that experience, and that's the key word, learn, because everybody writes the first book, it's terrible, but some of us convince ourselves that first book is great, and they keep making the same mistakes as they go along. I learned so much from that, and my next book was half the length, if that. It's more of a novella. And It took me a few years, a couple of rewrites to get it to where I wanted it to go. And it's not science fiction. I went completely a different way with it. It's more of a magical realism book.
Okay.
And this one I showed to that same professor that I mentioned earlier, and he loved it. And I knew if he loved it, because he was Zorro when it came with the red pen. He had no problem marking stuff up. So if he loved it, I had achieved something.
Yeah, that had to be encouraging for you.
Very, very encouraging. I think if I hadn't had that from him, he wasn't really a mentor, but he was just such a cool professor. And I didn't keep a lot of contact with him after I got out of college, but I kept in contact enough where I could say, hey, I've got this manuscript. Would you mind checking it out? And he did.
Sure. Well, give us a little overview of the manuscript. Obviously, don't give away any spoilers or get into real deep detail, but kind of give us an idea of what kind of story you created, and if you had to create a custom universe for this story, what was your process in putting together both the background and the foreground of the story that you ended up with for your second book?
Well, for this one, it's about a woman who goes back home after her mother dies, and that was the basic premise for it. And, you've seen that story before, but it's usually, kind of a Lifetime Network kind of thing. Well, I had seen in the news not too long, before I started writing it, a story about a black woman, whose mother is white, and they hadn't spoken in 10 years or something. I can't remember why, but I just thought about that. I'm thinking that would make great grist for a book. Mm-hmm. I kind of incorporated that into the book, but at the same time, the book is called By All Our Violent Guides, and I wanted to write a book that kind of was a guide map to why we do the things we do to people that we say we love. And that became the theme for the book, this whole thing of, that everything we do, love, affection, family, everything is touched in some way by some type of violence or predation,
Okay.
Sometimes it's overt. And, taking that, which, like I said, had really little to do with science fiction, but in this book I included ghosts and gods, and as if they were, there every day, kind of like 100 Years of Solitude. I wanted to present this thing where, everybody is affected by this, not just, Joe Blow. Everybody, everything is affected by this stain of violence that runs through existence.
Huh. And when I talk about process, or when I ask you about process, is writing for you a solitary affair? Do you do it alone? Do you have people you can toss ideas off of around you? Tell us a little bit about how you go about plying your craft.
It's very solitary, and it is initially. When I'm doing the first draft, it's almost like I'm in one of those altered states chambers where I see nothing, I hear nothing. Nobody else sees me. Once I get the first draft done, there are a few authors out there who I trust so much that they won't just throw glitter at me. They will cut me to the bone if need be. They get to read it. Then I get it back. I go through my other drafts, and then finally, once I get to the point where I've read it and read it and read it so much where I don't see any word that did not need to be here, then I think it's ready to go.
That was the hardest lesson. That was the hardest lesson that I had to learn, was that if it didn't move the story along, you take it out. It doesn't belong.
Oh yeah, and then I've learned a lot just from reading Toni Morrison's books. She is a god as far as I'm concerned, and her writing is that way. There's not a word in there that does not need to be there.
Right.
Even something I learned from her, even something so simple as, he stood up. Well, you don't need the word up. You can't stand down. That kind of thing.
That's true. And what are some of the other things, that stand out to you that crafting this second book really were put on the map for you in terms of, being retained for your process, helping you achieve, your goal of crafting a story and then, making it whole and making it ready to be told to somebody else?
I think the biggest thing was Violent Guides taught me that I could take risks and take chances.
In like plot or characters, or just take chances literarily?
All of the above. I mean, it's a book where if you actually stop to analyze it, nothing really happens in it. It's almost like a Beckett play. And that was one of the risks I took. I was like, I know this is literary fiction, but with ghosts and gods and things like that in it.
Sure.
And before, my first book, I was trying to write that for a specific audience, and I was taking zero risks, and that's one reason why I can't stand it now. It was just kill it with fire. Second book, when I decided to open up and say, look, take some chances. You're not going to land on Oprah's night table with this book, so just take a chance. That taught me you can break the rules, because I break the third wall. I do all those cool little tricks that when you're learning writing, they tell you not to do.
Right.
I did it, but I did it sparingly, and I think I did it successfully because people have responded well to it.
Uh-huh. Okay, so, I mean, I like to think that creatives who write, who paint, who do art, even creatives who do the musical work, songs and poetry, I would like to believe that all of us are works in progress that are never completed. You know what I mean? That we never reach some sort of plateau where we are perfect writers. I've only interviewed one person who said she was a perfect writer. Well, that interview almost went. That interview almost went off. No, it wasn't. It was someone else. But see the ridiculousness of thinking that one has achieved perfection as a writer is one that I have a tough time dealing with that. When people tell me, well, I did this book and it was the story was just perfect. And I don't know. If you go back to your second book and you read it right now, do you find places where you could have improved it? Let me ask you that.
Oh God, yes, definitely.
Yeah, me
too.
Me too. Absolutely.
There's no such thing as perfect anything. I mean, I don't care what you're doing. Even if you're making a cake, I mean, you can be in a Jello Lawson. There's no perfection. You can know your craft. That's one thing, and you can know your own talent. That's another thing. But I mean, I'm sure Shakespeare will go back and look at his plays and say, "Damn, why did I include this? I can change this."
Well, wait, he didn't even write them, did he?
Well, no, we can't go there. You can't touch that one.
Well, what about that? They always talk about that room full of 1,000 monkeys hitting the typewriter or hitting the keyboard and eventually coming up with all of his plays.
I hate those monkeys.
Where were they when I needed them? That's what I asked. And so, do you see yourself progressing well? I mean, let's take your second book. What was your second book published, by the way?
Self-published. So it's out there.
That doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, don't do that. Self-publishing is just as good as any other publishing. You know why? Because the bar has been lowered. Remember, up until about 10, 15 years ago, the top dozen publishers in this country decided who got seen, who got read, who got shelf space, who got attention. And I think that self-publishing has done a great, well, let's put it this way. It has changed the landscape of publishing because obviously some of the stuff that's self-published, some of it is not as good as it could be. How is that for being nice? I'm normally not that nice, but on the other hand, self-publishing lowers the bar to entrance to being published for people who can't get the attention of a good agent or, I think publishers still don't want to talk to authors because authors are largely crazy. But the thing that agents get very angry with me after they've they say, well, we don't really handle your kind of work. And I go, yeah, then I guess that catch-22 is true. And they go, well, what is that? I say, well, you can't get a publisher without an agent, and you can't get an agent unless you've published. And, of course, but how many people do we know for whom this was true, So I don't think self-publishing, I don't think self-publishing is in any way diminishing. Sometimes you just have to get your own stuff out there.
Exactly. I mean, I love the indie industry.
Yeah. And so, so your second book that you wrote, you got published. And whether it's self-published or not, it's still out there, and it's out there for sale. I'm looking on, let me look at your site again. Get your books link. Okay, so which of your books was this second one?
That was By All Our Violent Guides.
Our Violent Guides.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, it's kind of weird because even though that was the second one published, it wasn't the first one that I was written. The first one that actually was written was the Neon Lights, which was another a completely, divergent type of book for me. That one's a satire about publishing and writing, and it was a hoop to write that. But I actually wrote that one before I wrote Violent Guides, but I published Violent Guides before Neon came on.
Mhm. And tell us, give us a little bit about, Violent Guides, so people can kind of clue into where you are. By the way, do you write for a certain age group? Because some people write for young adults, some people write for adults, some people put a whole lot of sex and stuff in there, which, normally kind of precludes it being in high schools and elementary school libraries. But where does what's kind of like your target demographic as a reader?
I think mine would go from college on up. I haven't really done anything yet for the younger set, although that's coming in the future. I'm actually working on one because I promised my niece, who's about to graduate high school, that I would write a book in her honor.
Oh,
and I
very
promised
cool.
that like 5 years ago. And I said, before you graduate high school, it will be done. And so I've got a couple of months now to finish that one up.
How close are you?
Not close at all, to be honest.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, then once you get off this show, you got some work to do.
I got some writing to do, definitely. This latest book, this Brothers Jetstream, took so much out of me that I had to sit back and take a break for a while.
Yeah. Well, before you get to that one, I'm sorry. Can you give us a little bit better idea of Violent Guides? Our Violent Guides, actually, right?
Yep. By all our Violent Guides is a literary drama, magical realism piece, and one of the taglines is it's about a novel of presences, love, mysteries, and art, which is kind of flu and vague in a sense. But when the very first line of the book is extremely short, but it's also very catching. And that's what this book is. It's a short book, but it's very, very catching. I mean, I used to have one of my readers when I was doing this one. She would read the short stories, and she'd always say, your stories leave me feeling hollow. And I used to think that was a bad thing from her. But then she says, no, it doesn't mean. It means that, you hit me in the stomach with it, and I've got to go and deal with this now. I mean, you made me have, I guess the kids today would say, you made me have feels.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what this book is designed to do. It's designed to, like I said, it's about, the small instances of violence that permeate everybody's lives, whether we realize it or not. And not just, physical violence, but emotional violence. All these little bits that we do sometimes, consciously, a lot of times unconsciously. So that was that one. I wanted to do a quick, 1-2 punch book about that when you get to the end of it, you have to question some things in your own life.
I see. Now, it also sounds kind of like you are a thematic writer, in that you kind of cover not the same ground, but a kind of there's a similar feel to your stories. Is that something that you see or you recognize, or am I just crazy?
Oh no, that's definitely there. I see it, and others have pointed it out. It's almost like if when you read a Harlan Ellison story, in the morning that you're in for a certain visceral, emotional, and intellectual jolt. You just know that going in, and that's how I like my stories and books to affect the reader. I'm not always successful with that. By no means comparing myself to Harlan Ellison as far as talent, but when it comes to intent, that's my intent. I want those ingredients in everything that I do, whether it's serious or funny.
So you want a reader to have kind of like a visceral reaction to the story that you've told.
Definitely. They have to feel something from it. If you don't, there are certain, in the short story collection that I did called Historical Inaccuracies, there are certain stories in there where they're just purely for fun and goofy. And even the fun and goofy things, there's still an emotional undercurrent to it. And that, to me, if the story doesn't have that to it, it's too flat. It's flat and uninteresting. So I never want to give anybody something flat and uninteresting.
And so there's an obvious quirky intent to the story, but that quirky intent it is still designed to lead people someplace, so that once they're done, they've got some, there's probably some consideration that has to be thought about. There has to be. It sounds like you're looking at thought-provoking tales.
Always, one way or another, there's got to be some thought, because otherwise it's just an empty, cotton candy experience, which everybody likes cotton candy now and then, but you want to have something with a few vitamins and minerals in it too. Yeah,
for me, I do the ending, or I think of a great ending, probably usually irony, and then I work backwards. I'll go ahead and I'll have a great ending line, and then I will write with my dumbass self, 220,000 words just to get to that ending,
You're more like a backwards pantser there.
Well, kind of, and one of the reasons why is because when someone reads a book, the last words in the book, how the book ends, is very, very important to what the reader's perception of the whole book will be. I think, same thing with a movie. I was being an ass once when Titanic came out, and I was going into another movie at the theater, and I was standing in line, and then all the Titanic people were coming out of the theater. And, I said, was it good? Was it really good? And they said, yeah. I said, no, don't tell me how it ends, because I was a I did the same thing for The Passion of the Christ, too. No, don't tell me how it ends. I think writers often have different goals. Mine is to make sure that when somebody finishes a book of mine, they feel like they've got, that they got a great ending, or there was some, great irony to the ending, and so your and my purpose in writing, or at least somehow in the crafting of the story, is similar, because I always want people to think, to give it some thought, to have a thought-provoking ending. Now, when you're writing and you're trying to create this visceral kind of canopy or tapestry for your story, what do you use? What, in a literary context, what do you use to drive the story forward in the way that you want? Is it emotion? Is it how characters behave? Is it a moral dilemma, or do you use all of those, or even none of those?
All of them, but with the first driver is always emotion.
Okay.
It's always I can't start writing something unless I feel where the story, feel the soul of the story, I guess you would call it, which sounds really highfalutin, but I've been reading other works like recently that and studying what the authors do, and they do the same thing. It's just, as soon as you read the first sentence, you feel the life of that story, and
right.
that has to drive everything I do. So I can't start writing something if I don't feel it yet. It always comes off to me as it's plastic. So that's my first one, and then everything else jumps in there.
Yeah. So for you to actually do the story, you kind of want it, to use an old beer term, you want it to be fully croissant before you start spinning it out. And then as you're going along, kind of what's your process? Do you already know where, hang on, let me just do this real quick because it's that time. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the blacksciencefictionsociety.com website. This is our 2016 Tax Day edition for those who wait till the last moment, and for those who are going to put out that, what is that, an extension until October. Happy Tax Day. Our special guest today is, I guess, now did you put together this description of you, writer, wanderer, and novelist?
I did.
Clarence Young. So we have writer, wanderer, novelist Clarence Young. And you know what? Before we get to the whole writing thing, let's jump into that title there. What do you mean by wanderer? I wanted to ask you that in the beginning, and I forgot because I'm old and I can't remember it. No, I got CRS disease.
That's an easy one. Even with my writing, it's like, and you kind of touched on it a couple of minutes ago. I don't like to write the same thing twice. I've always hated that. So in my writing, I kind of wander from genre to genre, even though speculative and science fiction is where my heart is. But I'll write a comedy. I'll write a literary drama. I'll do some short stories that contain barbarian Smurfs. Why? Because life is cool that way.
Barbarian Smurfs. Okay. I'm sorry. I had the momentary image of these little blue people going raping and pillaging through the countryside. But I kind of get you. Now, is that because of a challenge to yourself, or is it kind of to fight boredom? Your own inner boredom.
I'm gonna go with the boredom. Because to me, it's all about being fun. I mean, I like to have fun with what I'm doing. Even the violent guys, which you would think, considering its theme, it wouldn't be fun. There's a lot of humor in that book. I love having fun in my stuff. So, and fun is the antithesis of boredom. So I love to write different books, different themes, different feelings all the time. I haven't done a romance yet, but it's actually in the works.
Well, I don't know what to say about a romance. I just try to throw, everything, including the kitchen sink, into a story, because I would also like, for me, I would like there to be something for everyone, and not so much to the, what is it, having too many cooks in the kitchen or anything like that. But I like to kind of spread my stories out, so if somebody doesn't like the science of science fiction, they can kind of skip over that and pay attention to what the characters are doing or something like that. What do you do for the construct, for your own constructs? How do you do that? Especially in light of the fact that every single one of your works, you deliberately try to make, it sounds like, as different from every other thing that you've done before. Is that fair to say?
That's fair. That's definitely fair. That's a good question. I have to think on that one a bit because I'm not sure how to answer it yet. I think that if I were to just throw out my gut reaction would be, I tried for honesty in each one. I mean, I don't just with the comedy book, the Neon Lights. That's not just going for the straight yuck jokes. It goes back to that emotional honesty to it. There's an undercurrent of real reality to it, and that's what carries through all the books. Even though each one is different and each one is slightly weird, there's a reality and a truth to each one.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking like you're pushing out a story, but the actual creative basis for the story is a certain amount of human or humane honesty. Well, I don't want to say humane. Let's just say human honesty.
Yeah, definitely. Because it seems to me if you don't go into it with that, then again, it kind of goes back to being it's plastic fluff, And it's not so much the writer putting himself or herself into it. It's more being honest enough with your characters, your content, and your message to let them be what they need to be, as opposed to trying to force them down a set path just to get from point A to point B to say the end, which, that's what we get in a lot of our books now, or a lot of our art period.
Well, and I think that a lot of the stories that are being written now are suggested by the behavior of readers. For example, most people who go to movies, for example, do not want to be intellectually challenged at all or have to worry about remembering what they saw in Act 1 that shows up in Act 3 or anything like that. I get the feeling, and I think it's borne out by the kind of money that certain films make, most of the moviegoers want to be spoon-fed everything. They don't want to have, oh, you know what, you said it earlier, kind of like that popcorn thing. It's just a popcorn experience where you're kind of dead from behind the eyes into your brain, but your eyeballs are being entertained. And so
like you're on autopilot.
Yeah, for you, when you write, do you try to deliberately break through that wall to get people to feel, as you've said, and to sometimes even be disturbed by your stories? It sounds almost like there's a deliberate intent on your part to make that happen.
Yeah, you know how Charlie Brown had that, that's it moment with Lucy when she just described everything about him. It was like, that's what I want. That's it. That's precisely what I want to do when I write something. And, the readers will let me know if I'm successful, but I'm always the guy saying, wake up. It might be a shout. It might be just a slight little, tap on the wrist, but I want my stuff to wake people up. I intentionally go into it thinking you're going to be challenged when you read this, whether you want to be or not.
And to that end, what kind of feedback have you gotten about your collective work? Have you found that niche? No, I take that back. Has that niche found you yet?
It's gotten not creatively, but critically, people love the stuff. Now, like I said, I'm not on Oprah's night table yet, but it's, the books are out there and people enjoy them. Now, I think the one book that, if I can point to any one of them there where it's just like the theme still is escaping, or maybe I wasn't clear enough with it, is probably Violent Guides, because, that's the shortest one, and I went into that one thinking I want to be as concise as I can, which means I'm expecting the reader to do a lot of work for this book. And as a reader myself, that's what I love. I love when I can get a book and I'm not on autopilot. I'm doing work along with the writer. Violent Guides, I might have done that a bit too much. But on the whole, all of the books, Jetstreams, Neon Lights, Historical Inaccuracies, people are saying they're good books. They're books that they want to go back to and reread, which, to me, as a writer, that's like the biggest compliment. It's like if somebody says, I read your book, I want to go back and reread it, because not because it wasn't clear or because it was, just super confusing, but because I know that there is something more that you left there for me to find. And that just makes me cheese no end when I hear that from somebody.
It is good, isn't it? A book so nice they had to read it twice.
There we go.
And then that's definitely something that can suggest itself. That suggests the quality of the work that you turn in. And then how. I'm not asking for straight numbers, but what year did your second book get published?
That was, what is that?
The first one published.
2000, I want to say that might have been around 2008-ish, maybe. I think that's when I published that one.
All right, so in the last 8 years, can you see a definite trend in readership? Are you becoming more and more popular? Do you see that happening, or are you still kind of on that upward trek to get a little more well known, and a little more well known, and a little more well known? I mean, all of us would love to be able to live off our work, I would guess. But I mean, how are you seeing your popularity growing?
I'm still on that upward trek. I mean, my God, the mountain is so high. I am definitely still. I haven't even reached cloud level yet.
Yeah, it's funny that you. I'm sorry. It's funny that you mentioned Oprah. And being on Oprah's reading table or what have you. And here in Chicago, this is where I live, and Oprah did her show from here. And I wrote my first book in 2001, and it didn't get published until 2009. But in those 8 years, I went to reading groups, I met other authors, I did a number of things that not necessarily to increase visibility, but to be a better writer.
Yes.
And it's funny that every single Black author, their business model was, well, I'm going to write me a book, I'm going to get it published, and then I'm going to have Oprah put it in her book club. That was their business model. And somehow, it seems lacking in imagination, and obviously, with Oprah choosing Charles Dickens because she got burned a couple times by authors who were caught lying, it doesn't seem like a good business model to have. For you,
no.
do you have a marketing plan and a business plan in place that you're following to try to achieve, whatever it is you want to achieve, whether it's self-sufficiency with your publishing or, an invitation to the White House or Pulitzer Prize? I mean, what kind of, planning is going into the march forward?
If I called it planning, I'd be lying. I am the wandering hobo of letters.
Okay. You just throw some darts at a wall and see what sticks, right?
It's like with any writer, well, not any, but most of us, we are not marketers, especially when we, like I'm an indie writer, and so I do everything myself.
Right.
And when it comes to marketing, I'm the worst person at marketing myself. I will freely and honestly admit that. Which in a way is kind of liberating because it lets me write books like The Brothers Jetstream or historical inaccuracies and get away with it. Like kind of like we were saying, how with indie publishing, self-publishing now, the bar has been pretty much erased, or if you lowered where everybody can get under there now, or even over it. So
right.
that gives me some latitude. But as far as an actual business plan, it's write some more, keep writing, keep putting work out there. I mean, my main business plan is have fun in what you're doing. If you're not
right.
having fun, no matter what business plan you've got, you're going to tank.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of writers don't have, especially if they're new, don't have a very realistic understanding of how the whole process works. If you talk to them, they send their manuscripts to publishers, which is something that I had learned very early doesn't work because your average publisher won't even open it because of liability, et cetera, and publishers don't want to deal with authors. They just don't, because authors are crazy little creatures. They're needy. They are. I'm telling you, when I talk to the people who do fulfillment for my books, they are so obsequious. They are so apologetic. Even if I have a sniffle, they're really sorry that I had to sniff, or that a booger hit a tissue, or they're apologizing for everything because they have to deal with crazy people.
Mm-hmm.
So in your understanding of the publishing industry, how do you see moving forward? I know you said it's hit and miss, but Clarence, it's hard for me to believe that in the back of your mind you don't have things going on that plans, or even what do you call it? Even if you're subconscious, your subconscious does feed you. And if you pay attention, you can kind of listen to what it's feeding you or what it's saying to you. But, you've got a great website. That's part of marketing, okay? It's simple. It's easy to navigate. People can find things easily. They can make a purchase if they want to. They can look you up in other places. So, you have put some thought into this. And let me ask you this, what are the things that you know today that you think you've learned about marketing as an independent author who is doing it all on his own?
The biggest is the less is more model, I think. And I've told this to younger writers where, kind of like what you were saying, where, writers think, I've written a book, let me just send this beautiful thing off to the publisher now and sit back and collect royalty check. No. I used to teach a class of some students, and I would tell them, every time you go in a bookstore, look on all those books you see, 99% of those authors have day jobs. And, the kids' eyes were like, no, that can't be. They wrote a book. It's in a store. Like, yeah. Let me explain something to you. Yeah, so, I do have a plan. I do have a goal. I mean, definitely. I mean, I write books under my name, Clarence, and also, but mostly under Zigzag Claiborne, which, there's a whole story behind that if you guys want me to tell you that. But
well, yeah, you can't tell it, and I already know it because I looked it up. When you do a search for you get the other Clarence. Yeah,
the guy who wrote the Wonder Books for Boys or something, and I don't want to be associated with that, so I got this cool, pen name from another author who's
right. Yeah, but go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, I was going to say that the main thing when I was saying less is more is you want to have the website, you want to have a social presence. That's a given. Everybody's doing that now. But you don't want every single interaction to be, buy my book, this is me, look at me. Nobody likes that person in any facet of life. So my plan is, and everybody can pretty much, agree on this one, is that put out good work, say, look, this is what I did, but at the same time, always trumpet somebody else's work. And not in a way that it's going to shine a light on you, but just because there's so much excellence out there that, it'd be crazy not to share it. And I think my biggest, marketing plan, actually, to be honest, is marketing other people. I love telling other people, about other people's books. And, I'm not saying that doesn't always translate to somebody looking at my website and, buying mine. I mean, I'm sure that very rarely happens. But if it translates to buying someone else's work, my job is done.
Well, now that's very unusual because most black authors treat publishing, they treat their artistic endeavors. Most black creatives treat the world around us, financially as a zero-sum game. And if you and I bought into that philosophy, then I would never mention your work because my attitude would be every book that you sell of yours is money out of my pocket. Okay.
Oh, see, I found that to be completely the opposite with the black authors that I deal with and talk to. Right now there's a great campaign. I'll do a quick plug for this one indie author, Rosarium Publishing. They have an Indiegogo campaign out right now. Right. And one of their books is called The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria, which you are not going to get a better title than that for the next 10 years.
That's outstanding. Yeah.
And the short story collection it blew me away. And I have been trumpeting that left and right because I love it. And, Bill Campbell, who's the driving force behind Rosarium, does the exact same thing for every other author that he comes in contact with. Milton Davis is another one where, it's I don't know, it's a certain level of artistic, what is the word I want to use? My insomnia is starting to kick in. There's a certain level you get to where you're not in competition with everybody else. I think a lot of authors, black, white, whatever, if they're first starting out, they're like, okay, I've got to get my work out, and that's it. But once you realize that it's not, that zero sum, that it's like, look, if you're succeeding, then cool. If I'm succeeding because you mentioned me, even better. But, the fact that, you're succeeding means there's more visibility for black work, more visibility for feminist work, more visibility for all of that. And that's always beneficial. So that's how I operate. And most of the people that I dealt with, that's how they operate.
Right. And you guys are a rare group. Fortunately, there's more and more and more people like you as an author are starting to realize that we don't have to, grasp. What did my grandfather used to say? Oh, he holds a nickel so tight the buffalo takes a crap.
There you know.
And
I think with so many more people out here now trying to be writers, you got to, even though it's still a huge number, there's a lot of people who are realizing this is not quite what I thought it was. They're dropping off. You don't have those people who are just scrabbling to be, competitive all the time.
Yeah,
almost,
and the other part of... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking the other part of that is the more people we get reading, at this point, reading is on a decline. But the more people that we could stimulate into reading, the bigger our own audience becomes.
Exactly.
And so not everybody's going to like what you write. Not everybody's going to like what I write. Not everybody's going to like what Milton writes. But that doesn't mean that we can't say, well, maybe you don't like what I like. What is it you like? Oh, well, look, here's Clarence. He writes right up that alley. And not only is he writing up your alley, but he's going to make you think about what you wrote. Well, that's probably a good selling point for someone who actually does enjoy reading and reading, good work. So yes, you're right. There's a little bit of a I think it's a resurgence. It's something more from the 80s where authors realize that not only is there enough to go around, but the more people read, the more likely we're all to do well. So I am so glad to hear that about you, because I have talked to so many zero-sum fools who just don't, they don't get it.
And see, that's the thing, and they never will. I mean, even if they write a book that's decent or even good, it's not going anywhere, because what you put behind it matters. People can kind of pick up on the fight. If you're a jackass about things, which is basically what a lot of people are in writing, because a lot of writers are jackasses. It kind of goes. I am a jackass myself. It goes with the territory. We're solitary. We think we can create worlds with gods, but there's being a jackass, and then there's being the kind of jackass who nobody wants around, and you don't want to be that second jackass. You want to be a jackass that knows how to make somebody pancakes in the mornings, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty good. So it's good that you know a lot of these people. How much does networking play a role in at least helping you do your craft better, or at least even getting a little more notice for your own work?
It's slowly starting to build where people know the name more. People know when you see the the ZZC on something, pretty much what you're gonna get. I mean, I recently got a really big plug from Dave Eggers, which was kind of out of the blue, but I'm like, cool. If he read it and digged it, that means that it's not just this set core of friends that I have or family that are just out there reading my stuff. It's the work is actually decent enough where I can give it to anybody and they'll see what I'm doing with it. So slowly, bit by bit, I go to the cons, and I'm probably going to be at WorldCon, but if I do, it's just to cause trouble. But I do the cons.
You ever come to C2E2? Have you done C2E2 here in Chicago?
I'm sorry. You're breaking up on me.
Okay. Have you done C2E2 here in Chicago?
Nope, haven't done that one.
Okay.
But I would love to. I mean, and that's one thing I'm little by little learning about all these different cons out there, because I'm a very introverted person at heart. So when I get out and do cons, why do we even go out to cons? We're crazy people.
Well, I have a representative who does this show. Okay, there's the William Hayashi who does the show. And he's the same guy who I had to invent to be a DJ, to be on the radio, to do this, to do that, because he handles people well. But I would be just as happy staying home by myself doing my writing, because, that's where I'm comfortable. That's my comfort zone. I chose and really embraced the IT profession because I got to deal with inanimate objects rather than people. Because you know what, people just aren't my species. We'll get into that next time I'm the guest and like Penelope is the host. We'll talk about why people are not my species. But you know, even though you talk about being an introvert, you know, it's not like you're having any problem whatsoever talking about your work. And I think I think it's because your love for your work transcends whatever social discomfort may come your way. Would you agree with that?
Kind of, sort of. I mean, it's kind of weird. When I go to cons, I very rarely talk about my own stuff. Even if I'm on a panel, I might, you know, give a cursory mention to my stuff, but I'm more so talking about everybody else's stuff. It's like, hey, did you read this
why
book?
do you think that is?
You know, I love reading. I love books. That's, in a nutshell, when I'm out and about and I'm meeting Delilah Dawson, I'm meeting Milton Davis, I'm meeting, you know, Tarana Reeve Duke, I'm jazzed about their work. And so if anybody comes with, you know, 10 feet within me, I'm telling, hey, look, check this out. This you need to read this book. And it's very rarely is it my book.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only are you a good, is it bibliophile, I believe it's called, but you also
always
sound
sounds
like
so sexy, though.
Yeah, you're also a person with a good heart too, and I think the excitement of a good story is something that really draws you in. So, hey, nothing wrong with that.
Oh yeah, I will plug somebody that whose work just grabs me and makes me just squee. I will shout their praises to the world. I mean, I'm reading a book now called Bone Swans, a collection of stories by C.S.E. Cooney. Blowing me away.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me know when you get around to reading my stuff, okay?
Definitely.
God, I am such a whore. No, I'm really not.
Hey.
I mean, I don't pimp my stuff that much, you know, and I think maybe you and I are similar in that way, because for me, it's not so much going out and making someone read my book, okay, or read my trilogy, or read anything, my short stories. I'll tell you what tickles me and what excites me is when somebody comes up to me out of the blue and says, hey, are you the guy who wrote this thing? You know, that's cool. Mm-hmm. My biggest moment was in 2010. I went to Walgreens to refill a prescription, okay? And so the lady behind the counter, they ask you for your birth date, and she says, are you William Hayashi? I said, yes, I am. She said, are you William Hayashi, the author? Okay, that was the first time that anybody ever asked me, was I an author?
And see, that's when you do the moonwalk.
Well, that's also the day I should have bought me a lottery ticket too. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
But the visceral feeling of that, to have a stranger, somebody. I mean, this woman doesn't know me from Adam, because obviously she didn't recognize me when I walked up to the door or to the window, and my face is on the back of all those books. Well, okay, I got a little more gray, but anyway, but that's like a cool moment. So it's not so important for me right now. I don't know if it's going to be important later to go out there and do the hard sell for, you know, what I've written. But I am far more concerned with trying to get young kids excited about reading. And, you know, you could start them with comic books and maybe go to graphic novels, and then tell them, okay, here's some really cool books that are about us doing things that you've never read about. And that would be why I would want to excite kids about what I wrote, because I apologize to those of you who know me that well, but do you want to hear my elevator pitch for my story, just so that you can understand why I'm pitching it, you know, trying to get kids interested? My first trilogy tells a story of what happens in this country when Americans, when the country finds out that black folks have been secretly living on the backside of the moon since before Neil Armstrong got there. Now, nobody's ever written anything about black folks like that, ever. You know, and they talk about, well, you know, there are no new plots. And I go, oh, yes, there are when you're talking about people in a role that you would never, ever, ever think of them in. And so, you know, just like Barack Obama has shown a whole generation of kids. There are kids out there for whom have never been alive without an African American president. You know, or they've been alive during the whole time. They were never without an African American president. And so he's a really cool example of something that we never thought that would happen, at least not in my lifetime, until I heard that speech in 2004. And so to expose kids to the ideas, you know, comic books are very, very accessible for kids and, you know, young adults. And I think that's kind of the thing that I want to be able to convey is a nuanced telling of a story about us that hasn't been told before.
Definitely.
Do you ever think about that when you're writing your stories? You know, not everybody has to put some sort of race-biased component in it, but are most of your characters black?
Most of them are black, and
yeah.
And the last, like with Brothers Jetstream is about two black adventurers, which, you know, that alone is not something you see a lot.
That's true.
That when you mention about, you know, the youth, you have when I was a kid, everything that I exposed myself to had one common denominator to it. It was very imaginative. And you don't get that a lot anymore. The imaginations of not just kids, but just the general populace, but especially kids, because once you open a kid's imagination up, there's no stopping them.
Yeah.
But we've seen in the past, you know, 20, 30 years of not so much killing off of imagination, but definitely a leadening of it, where, you know, instead of giving kids or young adults various types of literature, various types of movies, various types of books, or music, it's all the same thing. I mean, I call it the Disneyfication of culture, where everybody's getting the exact same blasé bit of pablum. And, you know, that hurts not just the kids, but it hurts us as adults, because we adults are the ones who are putting this stuff out. I mean, that's why we've got, you know, this whole dystopian empire of books now, where every cover is the same, every story is the same. The only difference is, does the white kid have his hair swooping to the left or swooping to the right when they do the movie?
Right.
So if we can keep that imagination going in the kids with different types of works, and not just different types of, you know, ethnicity or, you know, male, female, you know, whatever the gender that you want to use. It's not just that. It's about the you know, diversity in the mind, about firing up their imagination to think, I can jump from this type of book to that type of book to that type of book, instead of staying within these, you know, set parameters, which is what so many writers think that's the meal ticket. If I write this type of book, I'm good to go. I mean, when I wrote The Brothers Jetstream, it kind of harkens back to those 80s movies like Buckaroo Banzai or Big Trouble in Little China. Those were brilliant. They were definitely for the imagination. I mean, when I was a teenager, I want to say 1984, when Buckaroo Banzai came out, that blew my mind, because I had not seen anything like that before. I mean, and it, you know, the whole story behind it was just, you know, grab on, we're going to take you for a ride, and if you don't hold on, you're going to fall off, and we'll never see you again. But if you can hold on, by the time you get to the end, you'd have come to something grand. And that's what I did with The Brothers Jetstream. I want that imagination and energy to suffuse it.
Very cool. And you know what? The other cool thing about both of those movies, Buckaroo Banzai and Big Trouble in Little China, is they were movies that people had never seen before.
Exactly.
You know, there was a combination of, well, Buckaroo Banzai, you had kind of like the sci-fi element, the extra-dimensional element. You had crazy people. You had aliens. And then you look at Big Trouble in Little China, it was more along, you know, fantasy, magical realm. but living in the real world. And so yeah, they were new. They were like that. I could think of the Love Boat thing, exciting and new. But but see, those are the things that do excite people's imaginations. You know what? The Blair Witch Project made so much money, even though it was a crap-ass film, but it was new. It was something that they had never seen before in a style that had never been seen before in filmmaking. And so what do? They try to capitalize on it with, what was that movie? Oh, Cloverfield. The whole, docudrama kind of thing. Or what's that other? Go ahead.
What was the other one? I was going to think, what was it? Was it the one that recently came out?
The haunted house ones, the supernatural ones, or what were those? Where they were like.
There was one like paranormal, they called it, where it was the same
thing.
That's
what it was. Paranormal something. In fact, or paranormal. Yeah. But yeah, and new has a way of exciting people in a way that's unexpected, but it's also visceral, because all of a sudden, if Hollywood sees new, and they see new that's making some money, then they're going to do it to death until new is no longer new anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they're 3D printing, trying to 3D print creativity. You can't do that.
Right.
I mean, there's a reason why nobody has ever replicated Buckaroo Banzai. I mean, there's been no sequel. You can't do a sequel to it, because even though I've heard some mumblings that people are trying to reimagine it, which would be terrible. But that movie did things. It wasn't just that you hadn't seen it before. It was that it was so smart. And the people related to that. Even if you didn't get the whole movie, you realized there was some smarts going on behind the scenes of this movie. I mean, it played with tropes, which is the same thing as Big Trouble in Little China did. It took the tropes of the standard adventure, buddy movie, and it turned them all on its head. And some people just liked it for the surface thrills. Some people liked it for the humor. More, and then others got the whole package, where they realized that Kurt Russell's role was really commentary on the typical blustery white guy who comes in and saves the day. Well, in this movie, he's an idiot through the whole movie, but he's supposedly he's the star of the movie.
Well, he backs into greatness. Yeah.
So that that kind of newness is what people are missing nowadays. I mean, I've heard that they're actually trying to do Big Trouble in Little China, remake that with The Rock. And again, if you don't get the subtext, if you don't get get underneath the skin of a movie or a book or anything, and realize what the creators were bringing to it, you can always clone something, but you're not going to get the essence of it. And that's what a lot of writers and creators nowadays. They get the surface thrills, but and they can they can blurt that out ad nauseum, but they're not getting anything else. And then people are so used to getting the sugary popcorn in their heads that they're I think we're seeing a move away from that a bit. Not as fast as I would like to see it, but it's happening. But there's also a pushback of where no, let's keep giving people the dystopia of the week movie. And nobody will notice that we're giving them the exact same thing all the time.
Well, that's true, but I mean, part of that is economics. If you're going to spend $100 million plus to make a movie, you want to spend it, or you want the movie written in a genre with a plot line and have the stars who can make back that money. That's a huge thing. When you talk about what's this one coming out? Avengers. Civil War.
Civil War, yeah.
Yeah, Captain America Civil War, sorry. And so, people have an investment in the characters. At least with the Avengers series, you have these people, these familiar people showing up, kind of like in a serial life. This is their life, this is the next part of their life. But let's look at, how many reboots have we had of Spider-Man? How many reboots have we had of the Hulk? Yeah, the Hulk. And how many reboots should we never have again of the Fantastic Four? So yeah, and the thing is in large part, writers are the ones who end up creating what happens with in film or in popular culture, or like you said, in kind of building new tropes, or at least trying. There's the attempt, but you look at that Superman movie where he killed what's his name, Zod, at the end of the movie. This is not your daddy's Superman. Your daddy's Superman never killed anybody. So so when you look at the kind of movie entertainment that you see today, is there any suggestion in your writing where you are kind of maybe putting it out there in an effort to be, maybe be adapted to the screen? And given the quirkiness of your stories, and please don't take any offense at the word, but I think it kind of describes how you describe it. But given the quirkiness of your stories, would they be successful in another medium like that, where people are used to going to a movie just so that they could eat the popcorn and turn off their brains and watch what's happening on the screen?
If they could do it, but it wouldn't be the books I put out there. They would, like with The Brothers Jet Stream, it's an adventure, and it's kind of an homage to those 80s movies. Yeah. But they were, I've joked around that, number one, they would probably cast it with Channing Tatum as a lead and turn it into a buddy movie.
Oh, God.
Which was just, that at that point, I'm getting in my spaceship and leaving the planet. But it could be done. We've had movies, like Buckaroo Banzai, Brazil, movies where, the producers and directors take a chance and say, we're going to give you, it's still going to be fun, but we're going to give you something a little more, like Brian Clapton used to say, something just completely different, So The Brothers Jet Stream would make a great movie. I've had a couple of people tell me, why aren't you working on a screenplay for this one yet?
Right.
It would. It's got all the big set pieces in it. It's got adventure, everything you could ask for. You even got Bigfoot in it.
Right. Do you write screenplays, by the way?
I don't. I've never tried that one.
Okay.
So that might be the next phase for Zigzag Claiborne is just try a screenplay. Like I said, I hate doing the same thing twice. Although I am working on a follow-up to The Brothers Jet Stream.
Okay, well, when you get to that point, drop me a note, and I'll send you the title of this book, which I think is probably the best book for a beginning screenwriter. It doesn't tell you how to write your story. What it tells you is how to organize your screenplay so that it makes sense, to help you with that. Yeah. And the reason why I ask is because, a lot of writers would love to see their work turned into a movie. I certainly would. Either that or a miniseries. So I just wondered if you thought if your work is translatable to the screen, and it sounds like at least that the one is something that you've given some thought about.
I haven't given it thought, but other people have told me that this will make a great movie. They say it's very visual. Now, for me, the one that I think that would actually make a good movie would be Neon Lights, the comedy. I can see that one transferring really well to the screen because it's screwball comedy, but it's also very smart satire, which we don't get a lot of that in our entertainment.
Tell us a little about. Give us a synopsis about the story.
That one is. I wrote that a few years back at the height of the street lit genre, where everybody was like, street lit is it. If you went to a publisher, if you were a black writer, publisher's like, okay, do you have anything street for me? If you said no, they showed you the door. So I wanted to write a book about it's. A lot of people say, well, you just write about you and what you went through. I'm like, no, not really. It's kind of vaguely sort of me, but it's just goofiness. It's about a writer who has to write a street book for his publisher, but he doesn't want to do it, so he sets out to write the worst book he can think of, thinking that it'll fulfill the contract, but it will tank. Well, it becomes his biggest selling book, so he has to deal with that. And the trick with the book was I wrote a 2-in-1 book because I actually wrote that second book that he did, the street lit novel. So you're reading two books at the same time that interweave. And that was a lot of fun to do. And it is, I don't, plug myself a lot, but this is damn funny. I read this one and still laugh at it because it's so outrageous, but at the same time, it's true. I mean, there are scenes in there where I'm sure almost every black author out there has gone through certain situations and left with that look on their face like, what in the hell did I just happen to me here?
Yeah.
All I want to do is write a book, and yeah, so that one I can see translating to the screen because it's straight comedy. It's fun, but it also has the the message about words are words, and if you take a black author and say you have to write this, you pretty much curtail their career, and that's what publishing was doing. Was saying no, you guys have to write this. I mean, it's like asking.
It's the same thing in Hollywood. Where do black themed movies get funded? Well, it's they get funded when we are slaves, when we are butlers, and we are in positions in society that are subservient to the master race here in the United States.
Yeah,
those are the movies that get funded.
If I see the Help Part 2 come out, I'm burning down Hollywood. I'm just going to put that out there right now.
Well, and then, my continuous example is, George Lucas having to self-fund Red Tails. If for nothing else, the historical impact of that squadron in the World War II theater, it's a huge part of our history. As a matter of fact, I actually included the Tuskegee Airmen in one of my books even before that movie was announced. And the reason why was I wanted to make sure that part of our history, in this country, was at least reflected in the book by, talking about some characters who went through World War II at that time. Because, you know what, you've got a whole bunch of silly-ass white folks in Texas who are trying to rewrite American history by objecting to even mentions of slavery in their textbooks. One textbook even wrote about slaves being more like indentured servants who could buy their way free of their contracts.
Yeah, I saw that online, and my blood pressure still hasn't gone down from seeing that one.
and I'm half black, half Japanese. And Jarvis mentioned Brother from Another Planet. That was another outstanding movie that broke the mold. But I look at what happened to my dad's family. They were all locked up in Utah, in a concentration camp, and my dad and his brothers could only get out of there when they joined the army. See, that's the thing. This country has a shameful history in dealing with non-whites, and now we're at the point where you got a whole bunch of these conservative folks who want to rewrite history and forget about all of the things that have been done at the hands of European stock.
Right. That's one of the best things about the indie world right now is like indie filmmakers are coming out of the woodworks, putting out work that the bigger studios won't touch, and they're getting exposure. I mean, it's no longer where you have to wait for Warner Brothers or Paramount to put out a movie. Screw them. You've got so much work right now that's coming out where it's like, and people, it's not just like, 2 people see this. Lots of people are being exposed to this stuff. So I love the fact that we no longer have to wait on anybody else to tell our stories, whether it's movies or books. I mean, even music has gotten to the point now where the studios are like scrambling to hold on to their power because people realize, I don't need you. I can get the same reach.
Yeah, all of these digital tools for art, for music, for writing, for animation, all of these tools have made telling stories far more accessible to us than any other time in history, except, back when we were in oral history. So let's talk 5,000 years ago, But between then and now, the barrier to publication, the barrier to exposure, the barrier to creation has been lowered by so much that we get many more opportunities that we never would have had otherwise.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like we're in another glorious age of oral tradition now. I mean, it's a digital oral, but still oral, where the stories, you cannot keep them from being told anymore. And that was part of the power structure, was keep the stories from being told.
Right, exactly. And here's the other thing that is picking up a little more steam. We've talked on this show about Afrofuturism, the telling of our stories where we're actually in the future, whereas, all of science fiction up until just now, the most we could get is a red shirt that lasted 6 minutes into a certain show.
Mm-hmm.
But now, you have people writing Afrofuturism, Afro-retroism stories that are gaining traction. And the cool part about that is they're far more imaginative than a reboot of Bewitched or a retelling of Spider-Man or whatever, because these stories are brand new. And if you take away the insipid racism of our culture, these are fun stories that have never been seen before. So if you're going to make money and you want to bring out that exciting and new thing, well, here's a story, here's a whole genre, the Afro movement in terms of futurism, retroism, and then, I write in the time period of today or near today, because I like to talk about today's issues in a way that makes them accessible but not necessarily a threat. If you write and the primary culture considers you a threat, they will do things to try to shut you down. But we have more imagination because our imagination has not been exposed.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And
your stories,
and
your stories about us. Go ahead.
And I was going to say that, we have with the whole Afrofuturism, we have I want to say more like a freedom of imagination. We're not constrained to tell the same stories over and over in order to keep the same power structures in place.
Right.
And that is what's appealing to people. I'm reading a book now called Ancient by Kini. I'm probably killing her name, but it's Kini Abdul Salam, and it's a collection of short stories. It's sensuality as science fiction. You wouldn't get that from anybody else, but granted, yes, you could, but for our purposes, you wouldn't get that from anything else but Afrofuturism. Most stories aren't going to give you the level of sensuality that she's putting into these stories, and it's not just sex; it's sensuality. It's stories presenting humans as sensual machines, which is basically what we are. There's a story in there where it could be the Terminator, except she's not using metal cyborgs or things like that. It's all internal. And that's part of what makes Afrofuturism or just black speculative fiction period, is we tend to go for the internal. It's not enough to say, black people on a spaceship when they're going out. Yeah, okay, that's cool. But what about what's going on in their lives? What's inside? What is changing inside the people? And that's what, a lot of marginalized authors are so adept at portraying that. Number one, because we live that. So it's like, we are. It's almost like we are living science fiction tales right now, and other people are just telling science fiction tales. Well, we're waving like hello right here. Like I mentioned, Detroit is one gigantic Afrofuturist tale right now. And I've mentioned this to people before. We have the dystopia in the city where we've got the billionaire who's trying to run everything, and he's off on his untouchable space. And we've got the freedom fighters. There's a group in here called Afrotopia, where it's artists, writers, and everybody who are bringing Detroit's arts to the fore. Detroit is huge in arts, huge in science fiction. A lot of people don't know that.
Always has been, actually.
Always has been. Yeah. So that resurgence of the imagination, creativity, the the inner life, is something that is not going to go away. It's just going to get bigger and bigger, get more exposure, and eventually people will start realizing that this is the new frontier. It's not enough just to keep writing spaceship stories and having somebody save the world. That's done. You've got to do more than that. And I see that happening in so many people's works. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are just about out of time, and Jarvis usually jumps in and says our good night. I hope he's around.
Jarvis, did he put you to sleep?
Well, no, I don't think he's. Well, I hope he's not asleep. I don't know. I'm not at his house. But here's the deal. When you mentioned that you are going to attend, conventions and things like that. Always try to put your the events that you're going to attend on the events calendar at BSFS, so that people can find you. If somebody has something to do, or doesn't have something to do on a Saturday, they look up, they say, oh, he's going to be, at this next conference, or he's going to be down in Atlanta or whatever. That way people can keep up with you, or just try to find you to try to meet you. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
And then if you come down to Chicago to any of these conferences, I'm going to buy you lunch, because that's the kind of guy I am.
Deep dish pizza, I'm there.
Oh, actually, yeah. There's Gino's East. Let me tell you about their pizza. If you get a deep dish pizza and you get, like sausage, believe it or not, every bite has sausage in it. Every single bite. They have a layer of sausage right above the crust. And then they put the cheese and the other stuff on it. I will take you there. Remind me of that, okay, when you bring your successful ass down here.
I will start a con simply for that.
Okay.
Call it Pizza Con.
All right. Very good. And we got about 2 minutes to go. First of all, I want to thank you for being on, man. This has been great. I've enjoyed the conversation. I always ask, did it feel like 2 hours?
It did not. It really did. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking we can still keep going on talking.
Yeah, we could. But basically, sometime in the future we're going to bring you back, because that's what we want to do. We want to keep exposing people to the kinds of art that we produce, the kinds of works that we produce, and the kinds of the different view that we provide, America, that up until now very few people have had the opportunity to hear. You know what I'm saying? All right. So Jarvis was snoring, but I'm hoping he pops in, gets ready to say goodbye, because this has been a great show. This has been our tax show, our April 15th show for 2016. My special thanks to Clarence Young. But if you're going to look for him and look for his works, look for Zigzag Claiborne, because there are so many Clarence Youngs out there. We don't want you to get buried in the dust, right?
Right. Definitely look for Zigzag Claiborne, and they'll find you. You'll find me.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like our peerless leader is going to drop in, and say his goodbyes. So what I want to do is I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank the people who picked this up as a podcast, and especially all of the people who helped keep. Oh no, here he is. Darn it! I was going to get this.
Hey, hold up.
He must have been going out for pizza himself.
Oh no, I'm over here clicking around on the computer. You guys are crazy. At first, I want to say that both of you are just nuts. But it's been a great show, and it's been really good getting to know Clarence more, because when we were at the conference, we dapped, we talked for a brief moment, and we talked a little bit online, but getting to know the complete story here was really good. And thank you again, William, for making it entertaining, as always. And also,
always a pleasure.
And also, I can never, ever, ever forget the people that came in and participated on the show. They shared the show online with other people, and they actually came in and listened. So I appreciate that as well, and thank you very much, everyone. And with that, I'm going to keep it real short. love, peace, and hair grease.
All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see everybody next week.
All right.